Welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bello, and today I've got Erika Andersen on the show. Erika, welcome.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you. I was so excited when we were just talking before I hit record. I was like, gosh, I should have hit record already. We're already talking about so many great things. But before we talk about the danger of ignoring the human side of change and just change in general, how we're not comfortable with it and all the things that happen with it, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for the audience?
So I'm Erika Andersen, and I'm the founder of a company called Proteus International, founded it in 1990. And our focus is on what we call leader readiness. We help our clients, both individuals and organizations, get clear about the future they want to create for themselves, and then we help them create it. So a lot of that is helping leaders be ready for the future, have the skills and the understanding and insights in order to be ready for what comes.
That's powerful and perfect timing too. I know everyone's goal setting for 2022. And of course, when this airs, it may be like, December or January. So this is perfect timing, just very relevant information. The only constant is change. That is something that I've heard before. And so we have to get comfortable in a way, as comfortable as possible, because things are constantly changing. So I guess where should we begin in terms of change? I mean, there's so many different things. Is there something that you guide your clients through in terms of change management? And hey, here's where you are, here's where we're going. How do we bridge the gap?
Well, let me start as I started when we were having our wonderful conversation before you hit record, which is I have a new book that just came out called Change from the Inside Out.
Yeah.
And the subtitle is Making You, Your Team, and Your Organization Change Capable. And so, as I was saying to you, when I decided to write a book about change, which seems now weirdly prescient, but it was in 2018. And the reason I wanted to write a book about change, this is the fifth book I've written. I always, when I get curious about something, that's when I write a book, and I want to crack some kind of an important code about some topic that's interesting and important for people, especially leaders and entrepreneurs, of which I count myself one. And so I was thinking about change, and we've had a change practice for almost a decade, and we help people with this 5-step model, which I can explain. But what I really wanted to get down to was, why is change so hard for us? And then what happens when we actually make a change? When an individual human being makes a change, what's that kind of psychological and emotional process we go through? Because I felt like having good answers to those two questions would help me and leaders we work with and human beings in general just get better at change, which is what I'm trying to help people do. And I think I found good answers to those two questions.
That's awesome. And I love that you said, when you want to dive into something and crack a code, you write a book on it, because I've heard it said that the best way to learn is to teach. You really have to know your stuff. If you're going to talk about it or teach about it, you got to really know it. Versus if you listen to it once in passing, yeah, okay, I think I got it. But really, do you know it? Do you know it well enough to explain it to somebody else and get them to understand it?
Yes. And in fact, one of my favorite, I have many favorite quotes, but one of my favorite ones is one, from what I understand, from Albert Einstein, who said, "I can only explain something simply if I really understand it."
Yes.
Isn't that great? And it's true.
So
like when
true.
you hear people try to explain something and then just ramble on and it's all confused, like, you don't really know what you're talking about, right? And when somebody can explain something simply, it's because they've really gone down into the heart of it and they get it.
100%. I'm just laughing because I sent my brother some very difficult, confusing instructions to help me with something for real estate. And he sent me like a confused face. This would be a lot easier if you just had your real estate license. I wouldn't have to like coordinate with other people to meet you and do my stuff for me. But change is a big deal. So why is change so hard? What did you discover as you wrote the book?
Yes. Okay. So as I was thinking about it, I'm a big student of history. I feel like so much of who we are and how we operate arises from thousands of years of human history.
Absolutely.
And so as I started to think about it, I realized that until really recently, the last couple of generations, any individual human's life was very much the same from beginning to end. We usually 200 years ago, people grew up where their parents had grown up. They stayed there that whole time, their whole life. If their dad was a farmer, they were a farmer. If their dad was a cloth salesman, they were, it didn't change much.
Right.
And change 100, 200, 500 1,000 years ago, change was generally speaking an abnormality, an aberration, and a danger, a threat, right? Change was things like there was a war, or there was a famine, or there was a plague, or there was an earthquake, So we, over all those thousands of years, I think as human beings, we came to be wired to regard change as a threat and a danger. So today, when suddenly over the last 50 years, change has sped up so much, and I use at the beginning of the book, I use a personal example. I'm old enough that TV came about when I was a little kid. So when I was a little kid, we got our first television. And 10 years later, we got our first color TV. That was the pace of change in the 1950s and 60s, 10 years,
and
right?
now we have like the technology of a rocket ship in our pocket, like the first rocket ship that went out into the moon. Like we have that in our pocket.
Exactly. Those, when I was a kid, the computers that took up huge rooms, and had one byte of, now we wear those on our wrists.
Or even floppy disks. I remember those back in the day.
Oh my gosh. And so that same level of innovation that from the 50s to the 60s took 10 years, that level of innovation happens every 10 minutes now. So this is unprecedented. We've never had to deal with this as humans. So that ancient wiring, that there's a word, homeostasis, that means coming back to a previous known, that feels stable for survival.
Yes.
That urge in us has served us well until now. And now it mostly doesn't serve us very well, economically, organizationally, politically. So we have to, I think, become change capable. We have to rewire ourselves to feel at least neutral about change rather than negative and fearful, right?
Definitely. And change happens so much. I mean, obviously these last few years, so much has changed. And personally, I left my hometown and I moved to a different state. And I don't know, really, I didn't know anyone here. I have some friends now, in the course of a few months, but still, that's a change. My parents don't live 30 minutes away anymore. Lots of changes, but because of technology, it makes it feel less distant. You and I are doing a Zoom call. Where are you based out of currently?
I am about an hour and a half north of New York City. If my computer was turned the other direction, you would see the Hudson River.
Very cool. And see, I just moved over to Denver. So it's so amazing that we can be talking, and I'll have conversations with people in the Philippines, my virtual assistants possibly, or a team in India. And you don't even know until you ask, because the internet's so fast and stable, and whether they're an hour away and I'm like, oh, you're in Colorado too, or you're over near New York, near the Hudson River.
So Chris, my observation is that we can do all this stuff now. You and I can have a Zoom call. Yeah. We could be in India. I could be in Sri Lanka. We could be anywhere. But we, especially when change is imposed upon us, we're still like, whoa, wait a minute. We had kind of fearful historic kind of assessment of change. It's like, whoa, this is going to be bad. And in fact, so then as I said to you, the next thing I tried to crack was that code of like, what actually happens when we do go through a change? And so I observed and thought, and what I came to was this thing that we've come to call the change arc. Okay. And it's an arc because, like when you're going up a hill, it gets harder, and then down the other side, it's easier. So the first thing at the beginning of the arc is what we call proposed change. And it's when a change comes at you, and almost without exception, people want to know three things. They want to know, what does this mean for me? Right? What is this change going to mean for me? Second thing they want to know is, why is this happening? Because our preference is for the status quo, we want to have some immediate insight, like, wait a minute, why is this happening? Right? And then the third thing we want to know is, what will it look like when it's done? What will it look like post change? Because we have that intrinsic fear of the unknown. So if you just say, well, just make the change and we'll see what happens, that's terrifying. It feels like you're saying, just walk into that dark alley in the middle of the night, right? So we start trying to gather that information. And as we gather that information, this is where you start going up the arc. The next thing we call mindset shift. Almost without exception, again, when change is imposed upon us, our first belief, what we think to ourselves, is that the change is going to be difficult and costly and weird. Right?
Makes sense. Yeah. People don't like change.
Yeah. And they don't like it in this particular particular way. They think, okay, it's going to be difficult, meaning I don't know how to do this. This is going to be a bunch of stuff I don't know how to do. And maybe other people are going to make it harder for me to do. It's just going to be hard, difficult, right? Then costly means it's going to take away from me things that I value. So it might be time or money, but it's likely to be even more important things like identity or reputation or power or relationships, these really internal things that we think, ooh, if I have to change in this way, it will take these things away from me. We just assume that. We have even if we don't have any data yet, we assume that that's going to be true.
Right.
And weird just means strange. It's like, this is not how I do things, right? It just feels unnatural, right? Okay, so I noticed that's how people almost, God, I just had an experience of it this morning I was on a call with some colleagues in my company, and we're thinking about changing a process. And one of my colleagues she was just like, oh, I could tell by the look on her face. And I said, oh, wow, you're feeling like this is really going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
And she laughed and she said, yeah, what are those 3 words? Difficult, costly, weird. That's what I'm thinking right now. That's just what we think, right?
Right.
And I further noticed that when somebody actually does make a change, it's because their mindset shifts from thinking this change is going to be difficult, costly, and weird to it could be easy, rewarding, and normal. It could be easy. I could learn how to do it. I can figure this out. This is not so bad. It could be rewarding, meaning it will give me more than it will take away. Maybe it will make me feel dumb for a while because I don't know how to do it, but then ultimately my clients will like it better, or it will save me some time, right?
Right.
So shift. And then normal means people like me do it. I've talked to some of my friends. They seem to think this is an okay way to operate. And people I admire and want to emulate do it, which is why it's so important in organizations for leaders to model a change versus just talk about it.
Right.
Because people look to their leaders to see, are you just talking about this, or are you actually going to do it, right? Because that really normalizes the thing. So I noticed that when people make that shift, so that and you can tell because people, we say out loud what's in our minds. So when people go from saying, oh, this is just going to be terrible and I don't know how to do it, it's going to be a complete pain, to, well, I guess we could probably, then they're making that mindset shift, right?
Right.
And only then are people willing and able to learn the new behaviors that the change requires, and then the change can occur. And when I understood this, it was like the heavens opened up, because I realized there's this very famous statistic from McKinsey and Company that says that 70% of organizational change efforts fail.
Wow.
And they say that the primary reasons for that, according to their research, are lack of management support and lack of employee buy-in. And as soon as I figured out that change arc, I thought, oh, they haven't gone through their change arc. That's it. They're trying to make this organizational change happen, but they're all just sitting there thinking, nope, this is difficult, costly, and weird, and I am not buying it.
100%. Makes sense.
So then I looked at our 5-step change model and I realized, oh, this is great, because our 5-step change model is set up to do both things at once, to think about, the practical aspects of the change. What do we actually need to do? How can we plan it? What systems or processes or structures need to change? And helping people through their change arc. So doing the human and nuts and bolts aspects of change at the same time.
There's a lot there to unpack. I think about it, change management. I was in a big organization. I first signed up out of college and I was so excited to make change. And then I started to see all the, we've already done it like this. It already works. Why would you change that? Why change anything to improve it just a little bit? Because what's working now is fine. But It does take the buy-in as well as the leadership and setting the example. There's a lot that goes into it. So the 70% stat for McKinsey does not really surprise me, although it does make a great point. I mean, I totally understand why that's the case.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, everyone does. Anyone who's ever been part of an organizational change, because the things that people always say, which you just said, where people go, well, I don't know, it's working okay. Why? All that is them saying things that arise out of thinking that the change is going to be difficult, costly, and weird, right?
Exactly. People like to stay comfortable and they like certainty, which of course, what we've learned the last few years, there's no such thing as certainty. Anything can change at any time.
So if leaders, and I put entrepreneurs in that group because as an entrepreneur grows his or her business, there are going to be people that you bring in that you want to lead. The leaders who can help people through that change are going to win. And leaders who can't won't.
Right.
What I mean by that, the thing that they always tell you in airplanes, put on your own mask before attempting to help others, right?
Yes.
So then what we've started to, over the last couple of years, started to work with leaders is helping them get better at going through their own change arc. So helping them manage their own self-talk. A change, you start to realize you're going to have to make a change in your business, and you're like, oh man, it's like, hold up, wait. Okay. Yep, change is hard, change is difficult. I'm wired to think of it this way. Now, this particular change, how you think this to yourself, how could I make it easier for me and my folks? How could I make it more rewarding? What is the reward? Why is it good? How can I normalize it? You train yourself to start thinking through that arc first, you first. And then once you genuinely can see how the change could be easier, at least doable and rewarding and normal, then you can turn to your folks and help them through their change arc. And the big secret is that the first thing to do when you're telling your people about a change is listen. Don't expect that they're somehow magically not going to have that first part of the thing where they're thinking it's going to be hard. Just listen. Just don't try and talk them out of it. Don't try and over reassure them. Just take in their concerns, consider them legitimate. It's a normal human reaction. Say, yeah, it will be. Yeah, I can see how it's challenging. Yep, it's going to take us some time. Just whatever they say, just like, yeah, I can see how you're concerned. What else are you concerned about? When people feel heard all the way through, then they're ready to start hearing about the solutions. Right. Well, here's how we can make it easier. We're going to offer some training, or we're going to bring in somebody who already knows how to do this, and yeah, it will take some time, and you might feel kind of dumb at the beginning because you don't know how to do it. And when we do learn how to do it, the clients are going to like it so much better, really helping them shift their mindset. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I've heard people say that, a lot of times we wonder, what if this goes wrong? What if it doesn't work? Instead, we should actually look at the positives. What if this goes right? What could this look like? And then you start to buy in yourself, right?
Yes, precisely. How could we make this work? And that asking those kinds of questions is great too, because one of the things we realized, we have these, we call them change levers. You know how a lever is a force multiplier? Mm-hmm. There are 4 things that we encourage people to focus on when they're trying to help people through a change. And the first one is increase understanding. Just give people more context, more understanding. What is this change? Why is it happening? What will it look like when it's done? Why did we come to this? What problem are we trying to solve? All those things that people often don't get told in organizations is just do this thing. And we want to know, remember I said we want to know, what does this mean for me? Why is it happening? What will it look like? So increase people's understanding. That is so calming, and it gives people a context to start thinking about the change in a more positive way. So that's the first one.
Okay.
The second lever is clarify and reinforce priorities. Because lots of times when there's a change, people just assume everything's up for grabs. No, all of my priorities are out the window. And generally speaking, that's not true, right? Like I was just talking to somebody who's changing their sales. They have salespeople, and they had the salespeople focus geographically, and they're changing it to have them focus on industry verticals. And the salespeople are like, nothing's going to be the same. and the leader was able to go, no. We're still trying to create the best possible relationships with our clients. For the most part, your responsibilities as a salesperson are still the same. You're still having the same quota. Lots of things are staying the same. And that's so soothing and reassuring to people. And then they can focus on what actually is changing. It's not everything. It's just this specific thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the second one, clarify and reinforce priorities. And then the third one, and this one's really important, and it's why I started telling you this, is give control. The hardest thing about change for most people is it makes them feel out of control. It makes them feel like they're kind of being victimized by the change, right?
Right.
So if you can give people some choices, and that goes back to like saying to what you were saying to people, how could we do this? How do you suggest we do this? When should we do it? How can we make it easier for people? get them involved in solving the problems of the change,
Mhm.
and feeling like they have agency, right?
Yeah.
And that's super helpful. And then the fourth one is just give support. And that is, as I said before, primarily at the beginning, just listening, just accepting, listening to their concerns, really trying to understand. And then once they feel heard, helping them see what actual practical support you're going to give: tools, training, mentoring, whatever. And those four things: increase understanding, clarify and reinforce priorities, give control, give support, are wonderful tools for helping people move through their change arc and start to see it in a positive way.
I can see why change management is even a thing, because all these things fall under that. You can't just say, hey, this is how it's going to go. Good luck.
Exactly.
Next week it's starting, without any
Yeah.
support or any of these things that we just talked through. But whenever you explain it to people, they feel more comfortable. They're not unsure. They know how it's going to affect them, how their role will be maybe directly affected somehow, or
Yeah.
maybe they just have to step up into a new role, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And how is that going to work, and what tools?
Yeah.
One of the things that we a couple of years ago, we decided, and this is no harm, no foul, we decided to not use the term change management.
Okay.
Tell you why. The reason is because when people say that, what they mean is, I want to control it.
Right. It
I want
sounds
to
like
make
upper
it,
management is forcing
yes,
something.
I want to work it the way I want to work it. And instead, what we use is, which I really love, change acceleration.
I love
how do you
that.
help people move through change more quickly, more painlessly, right?
Right. Change acceleration. That's a great way of looking at it, because I know the words that we use are very powerful. So
Yes,
that changes the perspective as well. Instead of like, oh, this is something management or my boss wants me to do, to we're going to accelerate change.
exactly. I also like it because, and this may sound odd since I do a lot of change work, I don't think you can manage change. Change always has unintended consequences. Like if you make a big change in your organization, the fifth step in our 5-step model is keep the change going. And what we mean is really attend to it. Once you've made the change and help people through it, you can't just go, okay, done. You have to stay looking at it and look at, is it really achieving the measures that we set for it? How is it going? Is something else bad happening as a result that we need to then also accelerate through? And an example I give in the book is a company that decided to improve its production process for its core product. And so what they did was they had an actual assembly line, and they decided to automate part of it. And that worked very well. They brought in the automation, they got integrated, it was great. But then they noticed, because they were keeping track, they didn't just wander away, that the line wasn't speeding up the way they thought it would by putting in the automation. So they looked a little more closely, and what was happening is, at the end of the automation segment, when it went back to human beings, they couldn't go any faster than they were going before. So the line slowed back down to human pace. So what they had to do was rework the line so that after the automation segment, there were actually 2 lines, because the automation was producing product about twice as fast as the people could.
But they were still the bottleneck.
Yeah. Exactly. So they had to go back in and make the change with the people, giving them control. Okay, how do you want to do this? Who do you want to, should we rebuild it? Okay, how are we going to assign this new role, to your point? So it's not a matter of managing it, keeping it tightly controlled. It's keeping going with it and seeing what unfolds. It's a lot how agile software development has happened, because you can't just do it all at once. You have to iterate it, because it's going to keep changing.
Absolutely. And it's tough. I know for anyone listening who's been in the large organizations, because I kind of felt, excited, like I could take over the world. And then it only took 2 or 3 years for me to be like, you know what, I'm not even going to bring up an idea, because I know how much work and effort, because there's so many, anytime we would try to do a project, I'm just thinking from my own personal experience before I left corporate America to pursue my own ventures, that we needed finance, we needed purchasing. We had 6 different people, because it affects everybody.
Yes.
And then you want to increase something in one area, but that's going to affect something else, or finance doesn't improve, right? So everything ties together.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean by unintended consequences. And one of the reasons I love our change model is it understands that and starts out usually. So the first and second step of our change model, it's usually a small group of people, usually senior people, who are thinking about a change that should be made. And in the first step, it's clarify the change and why it's needed. So they're getting clear about that on behalf of themselves, but also on behalf of the whole organization as the rest of the organization gets brought in, right? What's the change? Why is it needed? Second step is envision the future state. What will it look like when it's been made?
Okay.
And then the third step, you start bringing other people into the tent for a big, I'm sure you experienced this, for a kind of a big change in a good sized organization. You usually have to nominate a change team, a group of people who will manage and drive it through, who will build the change plan and manage and drive it through. And that's what the third step is. So you bring them into the party. You say, okay, so here's what the change is. Here's why it's happening. Here's what it'll look like. Give them time to go through their change arc, then build the plan together. And then step 4, which almost never happens in organizations, and it's mostly what you're talking about, we call lead the transition. And it's not just executing the plan, it's figuring out, to your point, the groups that are going to be most affected by the change. And then figure out how you're going to help them using those change levers, help them through the change as you execute the plan. And then you kind of merge those two plans, the nuts and bolts change plan and the plan for helping people make their transition, and you execute them at the same time. So people are helped to be cool with the change at the same time you're implementing the change, right?
Right.
And it takes into account all the things you're saying about, because you have a chance then to think through, okay, who's going to be most affected by this? What kind of support do we need from them? How are we going to help them through the change? All those things that usually don't get thought about, right? Mm-hmm. So then in step 5, once you get to how to keep the change going, hopefully you've got a critical mass of support. You're really looking to see whether it's happening. You've already brought people into the tent. So if it starts to go off the rails, you're in communication with them. They'll tell you if it's not working and you can fix it, right?
Yes, right.
And so once you get to the point where it's institutionalized, the thing I really like about it is, I'll go back to the change capable. I feel like our approach to change not only helps people make a particular change, but it helps them get better at changing. It's like that thing of teaching people how to fish versus just giving them fish, right? If you've gone through this process once, you kind of understand the shape of change. So then if another change comes up, you're like, oh, okay, here we go again. Now, what's the change? Why is it needed? Right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I love that. So if you teach them how to go through change or how to change, it'll be a lot easier than just helping them through that one change.
Exactly. And a lot of change models, that's how, and it's still kind of the way it was 20 years ago when there was you experienced this, when there was a reorg, you'd kind of pick the organization up, shake it around for a while and set it back down again. And that was it for a couple of years, right?
Right.
And now it's just changes large and small happening on a daily basis. So you have to be good at change.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember every other week, it was a big company, thousands of people globally, multiple countries. And it was just like every week we would get 2 or 3 emails about so-and-so is now the VP of supply chain. So-and-so is the senior leader. I'm like, it doesn't, so-and-so is reporting to this person or that person. And it almost became too noisy where you ignored the emails. And it's like, well, what does that mean? 3 different changes this week in the supply chain organization. I don't understand. How's that going to affect me? And you kind of tune it out after a moment. You're like, well, whatever, I'm just going to keep doing my job and we'll see what happens.
100%. And that's, it's because that step of thinking about who's going to be most affected by the change, and they really need all that context and understanding. Right. Most people are fine with just either, if people aren't affected, they're not affected. They don't really care. Just let me go on about my business. Yeah. So that distinction usually isn't made. So they send the same kind of superficial messages to everyone, whether they're not affected at all, affected a little bit, or massively affected. Like probably the people who report to that guy who got restructured, they're getting the same superficial message that you've got and don't care at all, right?
Right.
Have to make that distinction of like, is this really affecting people's lives? And if so, we need to give them more context, right?
100%. And that's true, because I guess we're all inundated with so much information that we tend to only focus on the things that impact us directly. And I've been working on getting better at this. You might see some crisis or something happens in another country and it's easy to say, well, that stinks. I hope things work out, and you go back to your day to day. But when it's happening here in your neighborhood and you're like, oh my gosh, like this isn't my neighborhood. Now, all of a sudden you feel a different way because you're directly affected. And so I think that's incredibly important, especially in organizations, to understand how is this affecting our people? who's directly affected, and maybe even the people who aren't affected, like how should they understand like this is going to affect their colleagues in that certain department?
That's a great insight, Chris. That's exactly right. I'm working on this big change with a media company. They're changing the headline. The simple way to say it is they're changing how they sell ads from ratings based, old school linear TV, to impressions based. Okay. And it's affecting how they market, how they sell, how they keep inventory, how they deliver. It's affecting every part of their business almost. But there are, again, some people who are right in the heart of it and some people are less affected. So one of the things they're doing is just exactly as you say, having kind of overall messages for people who are less affected, saying, this is what we're doing. I'm sure it makes sense to you because it's where the industry's going. The people who are going to be most affected are X and Y, and hope you support them as they're going through this. So everybody knows. Right. But then the people who are really being affected think deeply about what do they need differently, what training do they need, what understanding do they need, how do they need help through that change arc. So it's different. People need different levels of information.
Absolutely, just depending on what's going on. But I do remember too, one funny thing, it's like, okay, I was directly affected. I was about to get on a plane and go on vacation, and I get the email that my boss was let go from the company. I'm like, oh, well, what's going to happen when I get back? How is that going to change? I was going on a trip on vacation, but at the same time, most people might be like, well, I didn't really work with her at that time. But for me, I'm like, well, I don't know who I report to now. What's going to happen to me, right? So now it was in my mind, whereas many of the other people in the organization were probably like, well, that's not my boss, whatever.
That's a great example. You needed more context. You needed, increased understanding, clarify and reinforce priorities.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a second. Does that mean I'm getting let go next? What's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to see how people react. But I think what you said there was extremely powerful about, instead of the teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish. Yes. I love that. If you can teach people how to change, how to adapt, how to work through this with a framework, they'll be less likely to freak out whenever something changes that they have no real control over, perhaps, in an organization, for example.
Yeah. Or just in your life. I mean, with a pandemic, stuff comes at us. And if we can, and knowing, kind of why we're wired to want to come back to the known, and then having this understanding of the change arc, what I've found for myself is I tend now, and this is pretty accurate, when a change comes at me, I feel pretty neutral about it generally. I've shifted my internal workings. I've managed my self-talk so that my first impulse is not fear, hesitation, negativity. It's like,
what does this mean? Let's look at
this Omicron. It's like, all right, let's see.
Interesting.
Let's see what's going to happen. Let's see if I really need to be concerned about it, or let's just let the information come in,
Right. That's a totally different perspective too, than like freaking out and worrying and being anxious. You're being neutral. I think neutral is amazing. I love that.
And neutral is such a great way to start, because not all change is good. I'm not saying that. Right. Some changes are terrible. Some changes are ill-conceived and unnecessary. They range all the way from fantastic to terrible.
Yep.
But if you look at any change fearfully, then it's hard for you to tell whether it's bad or good. All change is bad, right? But if you can come at it neutrally, then you get to use your powers of assessment and go, this Omicron thing seems pretty bad. Okay, how am I going to respond? Or, my new client, having this new client, that seems pretty great. How am I going to respond? So if you can assess it neutrally without being afraid, then you can really decide whether it's good or bad.
That's powerful. And I know I listen to a lot of people in podcasts, and I know Tony Robbins says we either move towards pleasure or away from pain. So I think that's a driving force, because a lot of times we like to stay neutral. If things aren't too bad, we're comfortable there, right? We're in the comfortable zone. We're not going to really change anything. But if something starts to cause us pain, either financial or physical or anything, then we might go to the doctor, or maybe I do need to get a job, right? Maybe I need to actually start.
Let me see you and raise you one. So that thing that Tony Robbins always says about we move toward pleasure and away from pain, I mostly agree with that. The problem is that our minds are so complicated that we also sometimes move toward fake pleasure and away from fake pain.
Right.
And with with change,
True.
if you believe what I've said about our historical wiring rechange, we tend to think that it's going to be painful, whether or not it actually is.
Right.
Right. So
It's
we
funny.
move away from it before we can figure out, hey, wait, what's going on here? So that's the beauty of coming to neutral and being a kind of neutral, fair witness about it.
Yes, I think the neutral thing is so important because a lot of times, I mean, what you're saying here, we'll make a false assumption without really doing the analysis. We're just assuming it's going to be the worst possible scenario. We're going to lose our job and everything's going to go terribly. Whereas if we come from a more neutral approach, you can see the pros and the cons, and you can be more, I mean, neutral is the perfect word. I can't even think of a synonym, but you can analyze what's the good stuff that could happen. Okay, what's maybe not my favorite thing that might happen? And then do your pros and cons and risk analysis. Should we go forward with this or not?
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the things in the step one of our change model is to do a risk and reward analysis. Once you decide we think we should make this change, okay, let's be super neutral. Let's say, what are the risks of not doing it and the rewards for doing it? But also, what are the risks of doing it? Let's look at all those things. And if we really lay them out neutrally, then we can make a final decision whether or not this change is worth doing, right?
Absolutely.
And usually we're too like freaked out to do that, right?
And I think in this day and age with so much information, I know you said 100, 200 years ago, people did the same stuff. Their parents did something, they did the same thing, they lived in the same town. Whereas now we're so connected, we can see what's happening somewhere else on a live video. I've never been to Australia, for example, but I could see like, oh, what's going on over there? Okay, interesting. I've never been there before, but I kind of know what's happening in a certain area and maybe mindsets and ideas. But at the same time, we're so overwhelmed with information and bombardment by the news and social media and updates and our family and friends that it can be very difficult to sift through. So I see why people tend to freeze up. Like there's too much. I'm just not going to make any decision. I'm going to go to panic mode without really staying neutral because we're trying to take in and understand and interpret so many different things every single day.
I think that's exactly right, Chris. And this is kind of about change and what I'm about to say, and kind of just about living in the 21st century. So I feel like it's my mom used to call it things like what I'm about to say, good mental hygiene. I think it's really good mental hygiene to decide what you don't have to worry about.
Right. That's so great. I love it.
Right? Because there's enough to worry about in your life that actually affects you. And I do this probably 10 times a day. I'll read an article in the paper and I'll start getting all bent out of shape. And it's like, you know what? I don't have to worry about that. I can't have any impact on it. And, it's just, I got other stuff to worry about. I feel like that's such a healthy thing to do.
So healthy. I saw a funny image and I screenshotted it. I think a friend shared it. And it had two images, and the first, it was like two people talking, I don't know, from some show or something like that. And the top one, he's asking, can I do something about it? And the person's like, no. And then the second caption says, well, then I've lost interest. If it's out of my control, I'm not really interested in worrying about it because what can I do?
And if and this is not to say that you shouldn't try and make the world a better place. I mean, sometimes I'll read an article and I'll think, can I do something about it? And I think, yes, I actually could. I could give some money or some time, or I could talk about it. I actually could do something about it. And so my mom and dad often said wise things. My dad used to say, worry is concern with no place to go.
I love that. I'm going to write it down.
And concern means I'm concerned and therefore I'm going to take these steps. Worry is just, it just rolls around in your head and puts you out and you can't do anything about it. So I don't want to worry. I want to be concerned when I should be concerned and can take action to resolve that concern. And I really try to make that distinction every day, because otherwise there's just too much. Well, you just drive yourself nuts.
Just having some sort of filter. And I know sometimes it seems like maybe we're such a small speck in the universe and we can't really make a change. I saw someone recently posted that starfish story. I don't know if you ever heard of, like, there's a storm and it washes up all these starfish on the shore, and there's two people walking and then one starts throwing starfish in one at a time. And I think the other person says something like, what are you doing? Like, you're not going to make a difference. You can't throw them all back in the ocean. And then the person throwing the starfish was like, well, I made a difference to that one. So it kind of reminds you of how, while it seems insignificant, if there's 1,000 starfish washed up on shore, it makes a difference to everyone that you throw back in the ocean, even though it may seem insignificant from the outside looking in.
Love that, Chris. And there are so many things there. Let me add two more things to that pile of starfish. One is we, in 2018, there was a local election. My husband and I always vote local election. And the guy that we really wanted to be the district attorney for our little area, great guy, somebody we'd actually gotten to know a little bit, amazing, worked his whole life in the area of restorative justice. He was just an amazing guy. And we talked to people and tried to get people to vote. We voted for him. He won by 17 votes. Wow. 17 votes. So our votes and the votes of our friends made that difference.
That really did make the difference.
Right? And so there's that. You make more of a difference than you think. But then the other thing is, I always love that quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which is, be the change that you want to see in the world. I feel like if we are the people, if we, kind of rise to our own highest expectations, and we are consistently the people we want to be, we are consistently fair and honest and kind and transparent, all the things we want to be, that has a powerful impact on the world. And that's not nothing.
So true.
Right?
Another quote that's kind of funny that I love is, be the person your dog thinks you are. Your dog always thinks you're a saint, no matter what. If you actually are that person, imagine how much better the world would be.
I love that. Yes.
That's exactly. It's so funny because your dog's looking at you like, oh, you're the best, you're the best human ever, even if you may not be the best owner or whatever. Yes. But I love that. Be the change you wish to see in the world. That's super powerful. If you just set the right example. Yes. I see this happen all the time. Someone will message me. Someone just did today. Hey, Chris, what's that place that you go to pick up meal prep foods? And I may make an impact in that business because if he starts going there, he might spend $3,000 there throughout the course of the year. And so his life has changed. He's had more convenient meals. That business has changed. They've got another customer, for example, just from me documenting on my social media what I'm already doing.
100%. I mean, we could go on and on, but I feel there's so many stories, and I really hope that people take that to heart. I know it is easy to feel there's so much change, there's so much negativity. It's easy to feel that we have no agency, and it's just not true.
Right.
We affect everyone we touch in our lives, which is hundreds and perhaps thousands of people,
Yeah. And I think there's so many people that we may indirectly affect that we don't even know. We may never hear about it. But there's also those stories of people who do reach out. They're kind of the starfish that you threw back in the ocean, and they'll tell you, hey, Chris, that I see it happen to me. Hey, Chris, that story you posted, that inspired me to go to the gym. I was about to sleep in and I went to the gym because I saw you were there. And I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have known. They wouldn't have told me. I would have just gone about my day. But because I've seen enough of that in my life, I know that, hey, if I set the example, it's going to make a positive impact for others, whether I know it or not. But it does feel kind of good to know, okay, I helped someone make a decision for themselves.
Don't you feel honored? I just got an email. Yes. This happens to me fairly often. I just got an email the other day, or maybe it was on LinkedIn, from somebody who was talking about one of my books, this book called Being Strategic, that came out maybe 2009. What is that? 12 years ago. And she said, I just wanted to let you know how important this book has been to me, and that when I'm trying to solve a big problem in my life, I use your model. And I'm like, oh my God.
That's amazing.
No? That's what we're meant to do, is help each other.
I think that's the best feeling, is whenever you see that your work is directly and positively impacting others, whether or not, you benefit financially, that doesn't matter as much, because if you're adding enough value, obviously you're going to be financially fine and set, be able to take care of your bills and all the things you need to do, while empowering others to also make the changes in their lives.
100%.
So many great things. Well, I know we're kind of coming up at the end of the hour. Is there anything that we missed, or any last topics you'd like to share in regards to not change management, but change acceleration?
Change acceleration. I think the only thing I really always want to leave people with, of course, I'd love it if people wanted to read my book, and I think it would be helpful to them, obviously, or I wouldn't have spent a couple of years writing it. And we can talk about, where people can get a hold of me and stuff. But I think the main thing I want to leave with your listeners is, you can become change capable. This is within your control. You can change your mind. You can change the way you think about change to make it so that you can thrive and navigate through this era of nonstop change. You don't have to feel overwhelmed by it. I really want people to understand and know that.
I love that. That's such a great reminder, because sometimes, like you said, the anxiety, the stress, so many different things coming our way. How's this going to impact us? The questions, the what ifs go to the worst place or worst case scenario. Whereas if you believe that you can become change capable and you approach it from that neutral standard, right? Like, let's look at this pros and cons instead of immediately freaking out. Yeah. That would immediately change people's lives today if they just start doing that. So yes. Very great message, Erika. I really appreciate you sharing this on my show. And where can people go to learn more about you, to connect with you? I can link everything up in the show notes for.
Oh, that'd be great. So the two websites. One is my company website, which is Proteus, PROTEUS international.com. You can find out all about us and how we help clients and what we do, who we are. And then the other is my personal website, Erika Andersen. Both my names are spelled a little strangely, ErikaAndersen. Andersen, very Scandinavian, erikaandersen.com. Yeah. And you can find out about the new book and my other books. And I also have a podcast, a monthly podcast that's just a 15-minute, tips and insights for leaders and managers, and whatever else you want to find out. So that'd
perfect.
Be great.
I'll be sure to link all that up in the show notes with the EN, because whenever I was typing it in earlier, I was like, wait a second, it's not ON. That goes to a different site. I will definitely link all that up in the show notes. ErikaAndersen.com and Proteus.international.com. Is that correct?
Proteus-international.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Dash. So I'll link that up so people don't have to remember. They can just go in the show notes and click into your sites. But Erika, thank you once again. I really appreciate this.
Oh, great.
A message we all need to hear, especially as 2022 is coming around the corner and people are setting goals. We can become change capable. So thank you once again.
Thanks so much.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being a listener to the show and for checking out my message. If you've been here for a while, I'm especially grateful for you. But if you're new here, thank you once again for being a listener. Just wanted to let you know, I help people buy, sell, or rent real estate across the nation in the US. I probably could even help you across the world, but it just gets a little more difficult with time zones and setting up times to chat. If you have any questions at all, shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle is Chris Bello _, or you can also go to my website, chrisbello.com/real estate. Again, that is chrisbello.com/real estate. Happy to help any way that I can. And thank you once again for being a listener.